Connie Hedegaard. Commissioner, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isaac. Good morning, everybody. It has been a long night, I can tell you. So if this conference will not give the result that it should, which we still hope and work on, then it's definitely not because people have not been working very hard. 6 months ago, hardly anyone was talking about a future climate regime, about what should follow the Copenhagen and Cancun agreements. Now, today, agreement is within reach. As you know, on a lot of very important implementing things, but also on as well as second commitment period as a roadmap to the future, a roadmap for negotiating the future regime, a framework that would be global and legally binding. The EU's roadmap is in the core of the intense negotiations. Of course, it is very encouraging for us to see that we have come to so far at this point. I'm proud that the European Union has been the driver of this progress. And what we have seen over the last few days is that the support of the roadmap is growing all the time. OSIS, the LDCs and the African group have expressed very strong support. And actually yesterday we issued a common statement by the European Union, the LDCs and OSIS, and there are interesting things in that I think you would find. But one of the sentences are that what we need is to effectively stop climate change, and that can only happen if all parties to the UNFCCC process will be committed to concrete efforts. I find it significant and telling that the poorest countries of this world, the most vulnerable, they now state together with the European Union that all parties will have to commit in the future. I also noticed that yesterday in the formal presentation in the plenary by Brazil, the Brazilian minister was now saying that Brazil would be in favor of a legally binding deal after 2020, also binding Brazil. And last night, when we were having talks in the smaller group that was established around midnight, there also the South African delegate said that they would also be willing to take part in a legally binding deal where they also will be legally bound. That is some progress, I think. We try to chart a pathway to change something that hasn't changed in many, many years, namely the division of the world into two camps, the two camps that was decided in the last century, back in 1992 and 1997. Obviously, what each of these parties would have to do can vary, but we all commit, and we commit in the same legal form, meaning that all will be equally legally bound to deliver on their commitments, but of course the commitments would be common but differentiated. But I must also say that although there are these encouraging signs, we are definitely not there yet. And time in Durban is now really short. The success or failure of Durban hangs on the small number of countries who have not yet committed to the roadmap and to the meaningful content that it, of course, must have. We need to get them on board today. We do not have too many hours left. The world is waiting for them. Thank you.
So let's start perhaps with you, sir, first role. Thank you.
Siddharth, Peter Fabricius from Independent Newspapers. Yesterday, the chief US negotiator, Todd Stern, in his press briefing first said that he supported the roadmap and then later last night the State Department issued a statement clarifying it to say he did not mean legally binding, he meant other aspects of the EU. Could you just give us some sense of where you think US stands and also who the other holdouts are that haven't come aboard?
As I indicated, I think it's very interesting that half of the basic group has now said that they are in favor not only of a legally binding deal, but the key point there is whether that also goes for their own commitments, South Africa and Brazil. Then I think that I've also indicated where two other major challenges are. And yes, I also saw this correction from the State Department. I always thought that the United States were in favor of a legally binding deal, provided that others were also legally bound. So in that sense, you wrote, all of you, very much about the Chinese press conference when they were also sort of articulating things in that direction, that the world should have a legally binding deal. I think also press releases were issued. But again, the discussion is, should it also go for themselves? And that is sort of the old game we are still in. That's the same parties we are still waiting for. We sat, as I said, in a small group of 28 ministers appointed by the respective regional groups, a very representative group, until 4 o'clock or a bit more this morning, and try to find solutions to that, and that process will continue here. I'm not quite sure when the presidency will call the meeting again, but I understand that the same forum will be convened again, and that is of course because we're working very, very hard to try to find a common way forward.
Let's stay here in the first row before moving back. Please, yes, the one lady in the corner. Thank you.
Fiona Harvey from The Guardian. Can I just ask in a bit more detail about China? What discussions have you had with China last night or in the past 24 hours? And what is your sense of what might happen today as regards China's participation in the roadmap?
I think that we have had good, constructive talks with China every day basically since we arrived. Whether it will lead to the outcome that we need, I cannot tell. I can only say we are not there yet. I think that it is interesting when you start to sort of do the counting of how many countries are actually joining up behind this call that, yes, we would like to have a second commitment period, but we also understand that we must have a framework for the future. Then I think it's clear that the responsibility lies very, very heavily on the shoulders now of those few big ones who are still not giving in so much as to us being able to agree what we need to agree. Obviously, you will understand that I'm not going into a lot of details about what we are talking about in these small rooms. I can only say I'm concerned about the pace. We all know that COPs do not necessarily end when they are scheduled to end, but even if you take some few more hours, we should not be mistaken. There isn't much time left.
Thank you, Commissioner. Gentleman with the blue shirt here, third row. Thanks.
Thanks. I'm Eric Lyman from BNA. Two things I'd like to get a little bit of an update on that I haven't been able to get any information on since yesterday. First is about the carrying forward of AAUs after 2012. I know that even within the EU there's some differences of opinion on this. Has there been any movement on that in the last day or so? And then of the four basic countries, you told us, and we already knew that Brazil and South Africa seem to be willing to move forward. China's a bit vague. Has there been any indication that India might be softening its position?
To the first question, the answer is yes. And to the other question, is India softening its position? I just think that I'm not here to sort of interpret all other kind of countries' position. Ask India whether they are softening their position. Yeah, you asked me whether there have been movements on this in the recent days, and yes, there have been movements.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let's move here, this area with the blue shirt. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Stian Reckler with Thomson Reuters Point Carbon. I was just wondering, at this stage of negotiations, how important is the 2015 deadline to the EU, and would you ultimately possibly choose to walk away from the Kyoto Protocol if you don't get the 2015 in?
You know, that's the kind of questions that journalists love to put. And if I say, yes, we would walk away, then I'm doomed and I could take the next plane home. And if I say no, then it's as if I'm giving up everything. So I think the best I can do in this situation is basically not to answer your questions, not because we are not standing firm, because we are. And we have a lot of support in the G77. A lot of countries also in that small room will agree with us that 2015, it is not an unfair deadline. 4 years to do what should be done, to enter into force even further down the pathway there. 2018 or no later than 2020. I mean, again, how would we go out and explain to people that 4 more years will not be enough to do these things? You should not forget, we have a lot of the detailed elements. The adaptation part, the technology part, the Green Climate Fund hopefully will be operational now. You know, there are so many elements. It's not that we have to start from scratch. And also, of course, if we get the overall deal that we are looking for here, then we would also have the second commitment period and all the things that would be preserved there. So we really do believe 4 years must be enough.
Thank you. Let's move there. You had the floor.
Eva Krukowska, Bloomberg News. Commissioner, when you say that a climate agreement is possible, do you mean an agreement on the roadmap? And if the EU decides to go for a second commitment period, what form would such a decision take? Thank you.
Yeah, if you mean if a climate deal, it's not the legally binding deal entering into force 1st of January next year, anything we are talking about here, we all know that. It's the roadmap and the balance that there is between this second commitment period that the EU could take, although not too many others are taking it, and then to have a roadmap, but not just a roadmap that leads to where we need to go. I mean, this is not just about roadmaps. This is about to find the strategy forward for the world so that it is likely that we can stay below the 2 degrees that we all agreed to in Cancun and the leaders agreed to in Copenhagen. And on this thing about the second commitment period, we are ready to have a ratifiable outcome, but of course the problem is that if we are discussing options where people ask us to ratify, and rather today than tomorrow, but then in return what we would get is that we start some kind of process to end no later than 2020, I think that everyone can see that is not exactly a good deal. It's not a balanced deal, but it's also a really, really poor outcome seen from a climate perspective, and that is why that's not good enough. And that is why the strength of the second commitment period has to be balanced by the strength of the roadmap.
Thank you. Let's move for the gentleman at the back with the black shirt. Thanks.
I'm Naveen from the BBC World Service. Have you noticed any change in India's position of late on the EU proposal than what it said before? Thank you.
As I said before, I think that to interpret the Indian delegation, what different people say, you should ask the Indians. But what several of you are hinting at is, yes, India has a relatively tough stance here. And that is why I note with great satisfaction that now South Africa and Brazil are moving their positions. That is half of basic. Now we are waiting for the other half.
Thanks. Let's move to the first row here. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Arthur Max from Associated Press. I wonder if you're talking about a ratifiable agreement, how do you reassure other parties that the United States can make a commitment here to a legally binding agreement that will require ratification when it has a history of not being able to ratify?
That is, of course, the kind of difficult questions that we are dealing with when we have good talks and when we negotiate. We all know what the challenge in the United States is, but we also know that for many years it has been an American ask that we should all be equally legally bound. So the question is, if some of those who normally would not accept this, if they are moving, then I think that one of the big obstacles that the Americans normally have set was the obstacle will be removed.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let's move to the gentleman here in the first row.
Yeah, Joydeep Gupta from India. Can you just explain exactly what are the points of difference with India's position? What are the sticking points right now?
I believe that the sticking points right now, it is this question about the legal form of the future. And it's of course also part of the discussion whether we should have these two tracks, where some are legally bound to commit, others are can voluntarily do actions. That is why when I mentioned this joint statement yesterday between EU, OSIS and LDC, I think it's interesting that some of the countries that would normally say, but of course we must be in a box on our own because we are poor and of course we should not do as much as the developed countries, when they say, we think we should have an outcome where we all commit, then I think it's something new. So that is encouraging, and that's what we have seen here in Durban, that more and more countries have realized that we should not for all eternity carry on with these two tracks. It of course does not mean that we should commit the same. Obviously, if you are a least developed country, you should not commit the same as if you're one of the world's richest countries. So that is why we say common but differential responsibilities must still be there, but we also just have to find a formula that recognizes the reality of the 21st century and not reflect the reality of the 20th century. And the other point that we are discussing, and which is definitely a sticking point, okay, one thing is that to agree to have a roadmap, but what is the timeline for it? How long time should it take to negotiate it? And when should it enter into force? And as a singer said the other day at a press conference here, if there's one thing we have learned from this process, then it is things never go faster than you would have thought. I mean, that's so far my experience. It always goes a bit slower than you, in your wildest imagination, would have thought. So we have to take care, if you calculate backwards, and you have to have at the latest in 2020 a new regime entering into force, then you need a number of years before to have concluded negotiations in order to get all the ratification and all these things done. And that is why we say no, 2017, it is too late. Some will argue that 2017 is fine. What will we do then if we in 2017 found out, wow, we didn't agree, what a pity, oh, we take some more years. And as you know, also from the World Energy Outlook, 2017 is the year where people who know about these things warn us that from 2017 we will have locked in energy investments to a degree that would make it very unlikely to stay below the 2 degrees. So, I mean, things are urgent here, and that is why it actually does matter a lot whether we take 4 years or 7 years or how many years people would suggest to negotiate what should be the future regime. That is why we think we must try to make this an efficient process and with a very clear timetable.
Perhaps we have time for 2 short questions. You are next on my list, lady in the 4th row. Thank you.
Thanks. It's Katie Kushakshi from Carbon Finance. I was wondering, just picking up on Eric's point, if you could elaborate on the progress made on the AAU discussions, please.
No, but as far as I understand, in the expert groups, there are also new proposals circulating. I think also Brazil has come forward with a constructive proposal that we are looking at in the European Union, and I think it would be possible, if we can agree on all these other things, then I'm quite confident that then we will be able in the end also to find a solution to the AU's question.
Sorry, the last question for you, sir. Thanks.
If these big countries, Andre Leroux, Media 24, South Africa, if these big countries, the outstanding big countries, don't come on board today, is there a deal or no deal from the EU perspective?
If there is no further movement from what I have seen until 4 o'clock this morning, then I must say I don't think that there will be a deal in Durban. That is what we are faced with. Now, it's not the first time in a COP that Thursday night you do not have the deal. So that is why I emphasize there is still time to move, and I must say there have been a lot of constructive talks, very constructive, where we really have gone into the key issues, where people are starting not to just repeat what they said, but try really to find solutions. So I think it is still within reach, but of course it is challenging, and we should not be mistaken that there are not that many hours left for those who still need to change their position a bit. But just to end on that note, I think that everyone, if you ask them, they can see where the deal could be in Durban. The only question is whether also countries in the end want to be part of such a deal.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. With that last question, we conclude the briefing for today, and good luck with the final hours of the day. Thanks.